"You don't belong in here." They laughed when the uniformed worker entered the VIP lounge with his little girl. Security sneered, executives whispered, and a billionaire publicly questioned his right to exist there. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't explain himself. Minutes later, every powerful person in that room would be watching him in silence. This story is about dignity under pressure and power built through sacrifice. Before I show you the exact moment when the injured CEO pointed across the terminal and saluted the man they mocked. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below, because this story is not about a lounge or a delay or some billionaire's bad morning. It is about what happens when the world finally realizes it was blind to the one man who never stopped doing the right thing even when everyone else treated him like he was nothing. He stood there without shrinking. A single dad with grease on his boots and a child's hand in his own, breathing steady while the room tried to swallow him. His posture was calm, unshakable, almost inconvenient in a place built on intimidation and control. Lena's fingers tightened around his as the noise of the terminal pushed in from every direction. She had not eaten since sunrise. The flight had been delayed for hours. He had promised her they would get somewhere safe and quiet, and he intended to keep that promise even if the walls themselves tried to push them back outside. They had entered the VIP terminal by accident at first. A power failure had flooded the main concourse with stranded passengers, and a frantic supervisor waved them toward the executive corridor, mistaking his uniform for a technical crew badge. The glass doors slid open and they stepped into a world that was not meant for them. Soft leather, crystal water. People who spoke as if gravity answered only to their voices. Eyes locked onto him immediately. Not curious, not neutral, measuring. A tall woman in a tailored suit approached with 2 private security officers at her side. Victor Haldane, CEO of Haldane Aerospace, was already watching from the far end of the lounge with visible irritation. She had just arrived from a board summit in Geneva. Every minute of delay was costing her millions. "This area is restricted," the woman said. He nodded once. "We were redirected here by terminal staff. My daughter's exhausted." Victor laughed, not loudly, just enough for everyone nearby to hear it. "That's a maintenance uniform," she said. "This is a private executive lounge." The room followed her gaze to the oil-stained fabric, the worn boots, the small backpack with a cartoon rocket stitched on the side. "I'll take her somewhere else," he said calmly. Victor raised a hand. "No, I'd prefer security escort him out. We can't have this becoming a waiting room." Several people chuckled. A man near the window muttered something about lost standards. The security officers stepped closer. He did not move. The power flickered again. Somewhere in the distance an alarm chirped, then went silent. The smell of jet fuel drifted faintly through the air. Lena tugged his sleeve. "Dad, is the plane coming?" "Soon," he told her. A rumble shook the floor. Far off, metal screamed. Then the world broke. A corporate jet attempting emergency landing clipped the runway lighting. Fuel ignited along the wing. The explosion did not reach the terminal, but the blast wave slammed through the glass wall of the VIP wing. People were thrown from their seats. Victor was hurled sideways into a structural column. Screams replaced laughter. Smoke rolled in. Fire alarms howled. The lights went out. He dropped to one knee, pulling his daughter under his body as debris rattled down around them. When the shaking stopped, he lifted his head and took in the room. Victor was on the floor. Blood darkened the side of her suit. She was not moving. Security scrambled. Someone shouted for a medic. Phones came out. No one knew what to do. He stood. The world narrowed. The noise dimmed. He crossed the room and knelt beside Victor, checking her pulse, her airway, the angle of her breathing. The signs were unmistakable. Internal bleeding, severe trauma, shock. "We need pressure," he said. "Now." They stared at him. "Listen to me," he said, voice steady, controlled. "If we don't stabilize her in the next few minutes, she's not making it." Someone finally moved. A staffer ran for emergency kits. The same security officer who had tried to remove him knelt beside him, hands shaking. He worked with what he had: a maintenance towel, a belt. The knowledge carved into him years earlier, when everything else had failed, and people had lived because he refused to let them die. Lena watched from the edge of the smoke with wide eyes, silent, trusting him completely. Outside, sirens wailed. The terminal remained sealed. No surgeon could reach them yet. Inside the shattered VIP lounge, the single dad they laughed at was now the only thing standing between the most powerful woman in the building and death. Smoke still clung to the air when he tightened the makeshift pressure wrap across the CEO's ribs. The belt he'd repurposed was pulled firm, his movements precise in a way that made the scattered onlookers back up without being told. The woman beneath his hands let out a thin, fractured breath. It was enough to tell him she was still fighting, but not enough to promise she'd keep doing it without help. "Her pulse is dropping," he murmured. The same security officer who'd earlier tried to escort him out swallowed hard. "What do you need?" "Space? Light? Anything sterile? Keep people back." His voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It simply carried a weight no one in that lounge expected from the man they'd mocked minutes earlier. He brushed damp hair away from the CEO's forehead, checking for scalp bleeding, then shifted to assess her ribs again. The injury wasn't from the explosion. It was from the force of her body slamming into the metal column. Blunt trauma. Internal hemorrhage. The kind you couldn't see until it was almost too late. A jagged groan escaped her lips, and she tried to turn, instinctively resisting the pain. He steadied her shoulder with a firm but careful hand. "Don't move," he said quietly. "Help is coming, but I need you to stay still." Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment she saw his face, a stranger kneeling above her in a uniform she associated with menial labor. But something in his tone, measured, controlled, cut through the shock. The VIP lounge was no longer a place of judgment. It was a triage zone. He glanced toward Lena. She stood near a broken table, hugging her backpack, her eyes locked on him with a kind of quiet faith that grounded him more than anything else in that room. "Dad," she whispered. "I'm right here," he said without looking up. "Stay close and stay safe." Alarms from the main terminal continued to pulse through the shattered glass wall. Emergency lights flickered, casting everything in an unsettling red glow. Passengers and executives huddled together, unsure where to move or who to listen to. Airport staff were overwhelmed, radios crackling with contradictory orders. Fire crews were trapped behind collapsed gates. Every second stretched thinner. A woman in a navy blazer approached, trembling. "The emergency medics can't get through the debris," she said. "They're trying to cut a path, but it could take 15 minutes. Maybe more." He nodded. "Then we keep her stable until they get here. You're sure you know what you're doing?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he checked the CEO's vitals again, adjusting her position slightly to ease the pressure on her lungs. The movements were instinctive, practiced. Then, only then, did he glance up. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." The woman exhaled shakily and backed away. Word began to spread. This wasn't guesswork. This wasn't luck. This was expertise. Real, lived-in, hard-earned expertise. A man in a business suit stepped forward, hands shaking. "If she dies here, if something happens, This entire place is finished. They'll blame the airport, the company, everyone. His voice cracked. Please, just do whatever you have to. I'm already doing it, he said. He signaled to the security officer for more towels. The man sprinted across the debris-strewn lounge, returning with a stack of cloths from the service station. As he pressed a fresh layer against the wound, he felt warm blood soaking through faster than he wanted. Pressure, he muttered. The officer knelt opposite him and pressed down, following his instructions carefully. Outside, police sirens grew louder but didn't get closer. Emergency. Response teams were still blocked by the wreckage. The fire from the jet's wing continued to burn on the tarmac, creating a choking haze that crept through every crack in the shattered windows. He didn't look up from his work. We need to elevate her legs. The officer complied, slipping a broken cushion under her feet. Passengers began whispering, recognizing the scene for what it was. The richest woman in the room was surviving because the man they'd dismissed had refused to walk away. A younger staffer approached him timidly. "Sir, I pulled these from the first aid kits in the hallway," she said, holding out a handful of alcohol wipes, sterile gauze, and a pair of gloves. He nodded gratefully. "Good, open the wipes." As she tore them, Lena stepped closer, watching her father's hands as he cleaned the surrounding skin with deliberate strokes. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She simply mirrored his steadiness, her presence a quiet reminder of why he kept breathing through every crisis life handed them. A tremor shook the floor as another emergency shutter sealed the concourse. People flinched. The CEO moaned, her fingers twitching against the cold marble. "Easy," he said. "Stay with me." Her eyes flickered open again. For the first time, she seemed to recognize the urgency, the danger, the fact that the room had changed. She tried to speak but managed only a strained exhale. "Save your breath," he said softly. "We're not losing you today." He layered the gauze, applied fresh pressure, and monitored the rhythm of her pulse. Still weak, still inconsistent, but not gone. A cluster of executives huddled in the corner, whispering about liability, public fallout, stock prices. But every few seconds, their eyes drifted back to him, the man they'd laughed at, because he was the only one doing anything that mattered. More sirens, more radio chatter, more unanswered questions. Then finally, a voice over the terminal. Loudspeaker. "Rescue teams are cutting through the south wall. Hold your positions. Do not move victims." He didn't allow himself relief yet. Not until they lifted her onto a stretcher and brought her to where real surgeons could take over. But for now, in the broken quiet of the VIP lounge, he kept her alive. And everyone saw it. Every single person who had mocked him saw it. He didn't care about their stares. He cared that his daughter was watching a world that had always looked past them finally begin to understand the truth about her father. The announcement crackled through the broken speakers, rescue teams cutting through the south wall, and a ripple of tense hope moved through the room. But he didn't loosen his grip on the pressure wrap. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't let his focus drift even for a heartbeat. The CEO's pulse was unstable, her breaths thin and uneven. Hope was dangerous until it was certain. The shattered VIP lounge felt smaller now, the air thicker. Smoke drifted in soft waves around the clusters of executives pressed against the far wall, each of them waiting for someone else to tell them what the next move should be. But no one had answers. The only person doing anything that mattered was still on his knees beside the injured woman, hands steady, eyes sharp. "Her pulse is weaker," the security officer said from across the CEO's body, fingers trembling slightly against the wrapped gauze. "I know," he replied. "Hold pressure. Don't shift it, not even a little." He reached for another sterile wipe from the small pile beside him and cleaned the blood pooling at her side. The wound wasn't external, but the internal bleeding was pressing upward, darkening the skin around her ribs. She needed a surgical team, a trauma unit, a room full of equipment he did not have. And yet, she was surviving because for the moment, he was enough. A new tremor vibrated through the floor, the sound of heavy equipment, striking concrete from somewhere beyond the sealed corridor. A high-pitched grinding followed, metal screaming against metal. Rescue crews were trying to force their way through the collapsed structure. "We have movement on the south wall," someone shouted. He didn't look up. "Let me know when you see lights." The officer nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. The others in the room waited silently, listening to the grinding, the pounding, the promise that help was getting closer inch by inch. Lena edged toward him, clutching her backpack again. She didn't speak. She didn't interrupt. She just knelt beside him, small and steady, her presence as grounding as a hand on his shoulder. "Stay back a little," he murmured without looking. "You're doing great." She nodded, scooting just far enough to keep clear while still watching over him, eyes flicking between the CEO and her father. The woman under his hand shifted, grimacing. Her eyelids fluttered open for a second, confusion clouding her gaze as she tried to orient herself. Her breath hitched. "You're safe," he said gently. "Just breathe slow, stay with me." She managed half a whisper, nothing coherent before drifting again. He checked her vitals, weak, faint, but present. "We need a better angle on her airway," he said. "There's swelling." He motioned to the security officer who slid his hands under the CEO's shoulders, lifting her just enough for him to adjust her position. He tilted her slightly, creating a clearer air passage without adding pressure to her ribs. "That's better," he murmured. "Keep holding her exactly like that." The grinding grew louder. Voices echoed from the hallway, muffled commands, clanging tools, the hum of rescue equipment. People pressed toward the shattered wall, trying to see through the smoke. A staffer rushed toward him, breathless. "They're almost through. Another few minutes." "Good," he said. "Tell them we have one critical patient and no stabilization equipment." She nodded and sprinted back toward the hallway. Beside him, the CEO's breathing faltered again. He leaned closer. "Hey, stay with me. You're not crashing on my watch." Her hand twitched. Her fingers brushed weakly against his wrist. It wasn't intentional, just the stray movement of someone drifting on the edge of shock. But when it happened, he felt the entire room freeze. These people had seen her speak on world stages, negotiate billion-dollar deals, fire executives with a single sentence, and now she was reaching toward the maintenance worker she had laughed at minutes before. But he didn't pause to consider the symbolism. He kept moving. "Her blood pressure's dropping too fast," he said. "I need something to elevate her circulation." The officer hesitated. "Like what?" "Water bottles, anything. Stack them under her legs." A group of executives scrambled, grabbing bottles, cushions, anything they could reach. They slid them beneath her legs as he instructed, raising them several inches off the floor. "That's it," he said. "Now everyone step back unless you're helping." They obeyed instantly. Another violent clang shook the terminal wall. A section of metal groaned, bending inward. Light pierced through the smoke, thin at first, then bright and sharp. The wall was breaking open. "They're here," someone cried. But he didn't move. "Her pulse?" he asked quietly. The security officer checked again. "It's stabilizing. Not great, but better." "Good. Keep pressure until they take over." Finally, the rescue team broke through. Firefighters in heavy gear rushed inside carrying medical packs, oxygen tanks, and cutting tools. Behind them came 2 paramedics hauling a portable stretcher. "Critical victim?" one paramedic shouted. "Here," he said, gesturing without lifting his hands from the wound. The paramedics knelt beside him, eyes widening at the improvised treatment setup, his belt, the towels, the sterile wipes arranged with battlefield precision. "What's her status?" the lead medic asked. "Blunt force trauma to the ribs," he said. "Probable internal bleeding. Airway compromised but open. Pulse weak and inconsistent. She needs surgical care." The medic nodded, impressed. "You did good work." He didn't respond. He just moved back enough for them to take over without disturbing the pressure he'd maintained for nearly half an hour. As the paramedics slid the CEO onto the stretcher, she stirred again. Her eyelids fluttered, unfocused, and then, just barely, turned toward him. He bowed his head once, a quiet acknowledgement she might never remember. Lena took his hand. "You saved her," she whispered. "No," he murmured, rising slowly from the floor. "I kept her alive long enough for the right people to finish the job." But the room knew the truth. Without him, the CEO would never have made it to that stretcher. Everyone who had mocked him only minutes before now watched him with a stunned, silent awe. And the victory strategy, crisis resolution, was now fully in motion. The moment the paramedics wheeled the stretcher toward the breach in the wall, the room finally remembered how to breathe. People exhaled in shaky bursts. Phones came back out. Executives began murmuring about liability again, but none of that mattered to him. His hands were still stained with someone else's blood, and his daughter's small fingers were curled around 2 of his, grounding him in a way nothing else could. "Dad, can we go home now?" Lena whispered. "Soon," he said softly. "We need to stay put until they clear the area." He scanned the room again, his instincts still turned high from the emergency. Debris was everywhere. Smoke hung stubbornly in the corners. The rescue team had carved a narrow escape route through the south wall, but beyond that corridor, alarms continued blaring, and the floor occasionally trembled from aftershocks of the blast. They weren't out of danger yet. A firefighter approached him. "Sir, we need a quick rundown of her condition before we transport her to the trauma bay." He nodded, giving concise details. Injury location, vitals, airway notes, stabilization measures. The firefighter listened, jaw tightening with respect. "You kept her alive," he said. "You saved our job." "I did what I could." That was more than enough. He didn't answer. He wasn't looking for praise. He was looking for a path out for Lena. A second firefighter joined them. "Sir, the paramedics want to know something. Were you military medical?" His breath caught for a half-second. A private truth brushing too close to the surface. "I've worked in high-pressure situations," he said simply. The firefighter nodded slowly, as if understanding what he didn't say. Behind them, executives were slowly rising, to their feet, adjusting their coats, brushing glass from their hair. A few glanced his way, not with contempt this time, but with a mixture of caution and something that almost looked like guilt. Moments earlier, these were the same people who didn't want him breathing their air. Now, they couldn't meet his eyes. The woman in the navy blazer, the one who'd first confronted him at the lounge entrance, approached with a hesitant step. "Thank you for what you did," she said, her voice quieter than before. He tightened his grip on Lena's hand. "Focus on getting the rest of your people safe." She flinched at the reminder, but nodded. He guided Lena toward a corner away from falling debris. Her small face was streaked with soot, but she stayed close, trusting him completely. He crouched beside her, brushing a loose curl from her forehead. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she whispered. "But you look tired." He almost smiled. "I'm all right." In truth, his muscles were trembling from the adrenaline crash. His back ached from kneeling over the injured CEO for so long. And deeper than that was an older ache. Years of training, of loss, of memories he tried not to revisit returning in flashes. He didn't want Lena to see that part of him. He didn't want her to know how much he'd given up before she was born. He stood slowly, his eyes scanning the room one more time. Emergency teams were moving people toward the corridor in small groups. The terminal's PA system crackled with updates. Fire contained, evacuation routes cleared, trauma bay prepared. But the VIP lounge was still a disaster zone. A male executive with the silver tie, one of the men who had laughed at him, stepped forward. "Sir, I didn't realize you had that kind of skill." "I didn't realize I needed to justify my presence," he replied. The man swallowed hard and stepped back. He wasn't trying to be cruel, he was simply done being underestimated. Another tremor shook the floor, followed by a burst of static from the loudspeakers. "All passengers in VIP Wing C prepare for escorted evacuation. Move only when directed." A firefighter gestured toward him. "You two stay close to me. We're escorting families with kids first." He nodded and lifted Lena into his arms. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders immediately, exhausted. He stepped into the line, forming near the new opening in the wall. Smoke curled through the air, but the path forward was clear enough. As they moved, conversations buzzed around them. "Did you see what he did? He kept the CEO alive for almost half an hour." "Who even is he?" "He said he was maintenance." "No way. That was battlefield-level triage." He kept walking. He didn't need their admiration or confusion. He only needed to get his daughter out safely. When they neared the breach, the firefighter halted them. "Hold on. Paramedics are transporting critical patient through first." They stepped aside. Moments later, the stretcher carrying the CEO emerged into the light. Paramedics moved quickly, shouting instructions, oxygen mask secured, IV lines bouncing beside her. She looked pale, drained, but alive. As they passed him, one of the paramedics glanced over. "You kept her alive long enough for a chance," she said. "Most people would have panicked." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. But as the stretcher rolled by, something unexpected happened. The CEO's hand twitched again. Her eyelids fluttered. She turned just slightly toward him. Not fully awake, not fully aware, but somehow sensing him. Her fingers lifted a few millimeters off the stretcher. It wasn't a salute. Not yet, but it was the beginning of the moment that would shock the world. "Move up," the firefighter called. He shifted forward with Lena, stepping through the breach. Bright light hit them. Cool air replaced smoke. Rescue teams swarmed the concourse. The worst was over. But the world's understanding of him had only just begun. Cool air swept across his face as he stepped fully into the concourse with Lena in his arms. The contrast was jarring. Bright lights, open space, frantic movement. Emergency teams rushed past with equipment. Police cordoned off sections, and the distant roar of engines filled the vast terminal. After the smoke and pressure of the shattered VIP lounge, this place felt almost unreal. But he didn't pause. He kept moving forward, guided by the firefighter leading evacuees toward a temporary medical checkpoint. Lena rested her head on his shoulder, her breath warm against his collar. She hadn't cried, not once. She'd watched him hold a woman's life together with nothing but grit and whatever scraps he could find. Now she simply held on, tired but trusting. He tightened his arm around her, grateful she was safe, grateful she hadn't seen the worst of the chaos. "Sir, right this way," the firefighter said, pointing toward a roped-off area with portable floodlights and rows of triage stations. He took a careful step into the marked zone. The ground vibrated from machinery, still working through rubble deeper in the terminal. Paramedics moved between patients on stretchers, assessing injuries from shattered glass, collapsed signage, and the blast wave that had ripped through the airport earlier. The smell of antiseptic mixed with smoke lingered in the air. A medic approached him. "Do you or your daughter need immediate attention?" "We're okay," he said. "Just soot and exhaustion." The medic nodded, scanning Lena quickly before waving them toward a clear corner away from heavy foot traffic. He set her down gently, kneeling so their eyes met. "You did amazing," he told her. She blinked slowly. "You're the one who saved her." His chest tightened. "We both did. You stayed calm. That counts." Before she could respond, a loud ripple of chatter rolled across the checkpoint. People were turning, pointing toward the far end of the corridor. He followed their gaze. A second team of paramedics was wheeling in the CEO, this time surrounded by hospital staff in surgical masks and blue trauma gowns. The portable ventilator clicked rhythmically beside the stretcher, tubes and wires trailing behind like threads trying to hold her to this world. Her face was drained of color, but less ashen than before. They were preparing to move her to the ambulance dock. A doctor jogged alongside the stretcher. "Pulse stabilizing. Repeat scans en route. Notify surgical team she's coming in with high-risk internal trauma." "She's responding," another said. "Not conscious yet, but holding." He exhaled slowly. Despite everything, she was still fighting. A sudden presence beside him made him straighten. The Navy blazer woman, her executive assistant or head of security, stood stiffly, arms pressed against her sides as if unsure what to do with them. She cleared her throat. "They told me you kept her alive until the team arrived." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. She's not an easy person to save," the woman added, voice unsteady. "Strong, but stubborn. She doesn't trust easily. When she wakes up, if she wakes up, she'll know what you did." "I didn't do it for her trust," he said. "I know, that's why it matters." Lena tugged his sleeve. "Dad, can we go home now, please?" "Soon," he said again. "We just need clearance to leave the terminal." He stood, guiding her toward a bench near the wall. She climbed onto it, swinging her legs slowly, trying to process everything. He brushed some soot from her cheek with his thumb. She leaned into his hand. As he sat beside her, a police officer approached him. Not aggressively, but with that stiff posture officers use when approaching someone whose story they haven't fully understood yet. "Sir," the officer said, "we need a brief statement on what happened inside the lounge. You were closest to the injured VIP." He nodded. "I can answer your questions." The officer glanced at Lena. "If your daughter wants to rest, we can bring her water." "She's fine," he said. The officer flipped open a notepad. "Did the victim lose consciousness before or after the blast wave?" "After," he replied. "She struck a structural column, severe blunt force, signs of internal bleeding almost immediately." The officer scribbled quickly. "Witnesses say you performed stabilizing actions?" "I kept pressure on the internal bleed and maintained her airway," he said. "That's all." "That's all?" the officer repeated, as if the understatement was too much. He offered nothing else. He didn't know details about his past. Not here. Not now. As the officer walked away, another wave of murmurs rose behind him. More executives arriving from the adjoining wing. More passengers seeing him and whispering. More people realizing the story already spreading through the terminal. The uniformed worker they mocked was the reason their CEO was still alive. He looked away, uninterested in their awe. Instead, he focused on Lena, who had begun rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. "We'll go home soon," he whispered. "I promise." A paramedic jogged toward him, breathless. "Sir?" "Wait a moment." He stood instinctively. "What is it?" The paramedic held out something small, wrapped in a clear evidence bag. "We found this under her, under the CEO, when we lifted her." It fell from her hand. Inside the bag was a broken, blood-smeared gold pen. Not just any pen, one engraved with the crest of her company. A symbol of authority, a symbol of the world that had tried to push him out of the room. "She must have been holding it," the paramedic said. "Maybe it broke during the impact." He stared at the pen, unsure why it mattered. Then he realized it wasn't the pen itself that mattered. It was the simple truth that when her world shattered, she had still reached for something familiar, and then reached for him. He handed the bag back. "Give it to her team, it's hers." "Understood." As the paramedic jogged away, a final call echoed through the concourse. "Prepare the ambulance exit. Victim is moving now." He turned toward the stretcher, toward the moment that would soon become the center of everything. And though he didn't know it yet, the next steps of the victory strategy, crisis resolution turning into mutual redemption, were already beginning to take shape in the shadows around them. The stretcher disappeared through the emergency exit, escorted by paramedics and hospital staff, and for a moment the concourse fell into a strange, suspended quiet. Even with alarms still echoing in distant corridors, even with cleanup crews shouting instructions, even with police moving the crowd back, there was a pocket of stillness around him and Lena. It was as if the building itself was trying to understand what had just happened. He didn't chase the stretcher. He didn't hover. He didn't need to. His part was done, at least for now. He moved his hand gently over Lena's hair and guided her toward the outer edges of the triage zone, away from the noise. "Can we leave now?" she asked, her voice small, hopeful. "Almost," he said. He wished it were simple. He wished they could just walk out of this place, buy her a warm meal, find a quiet bus home. But airports don't release people easily after an explosion. Every witness was being screened, every injured passenger logged, every movement tracked, and he, unintentionally, had become the center of a story the airport wasn't prepared to handle. A police lieutenant approached him, flanked by two officers. Not hostile, not aggressive, just cautious. "Sir, could you step over here for a moment?" the lieutenant asked. "For what?" he asked, keeping Lena close. "We need a more detailed statement. We've spoken to several witnesses from the lounge, and your involvement is significant." He nodded once. "Let my daughter sit somewhere safe first." The lieutenant hesitated, then gestured toward a nearby folding chair near the wall. "She can wait right there. I'll have someone stay with her." He knelt beside Lena. "I'll be right there. You can see me the whole time, okay?" She nodded, clutching her backpack like a lifeline. "Hurry!" He stood and followed the lieutenant a few steps away, keeping Lena always in his peripheral vision. "Name?" the lieutenant asked. "Elias Moreno." "Occupation?" "Aviation maintenance." The lieutenant studied him, trying to reconcile that answer with everything witnesses had described. "Several people said you performed emergency trauma procedures, advanced ones." "I did what I had to," he said. "How did you know what to do? I've seen injuries like that before." The lieutenant waited for more, pen poised, but Elias added nothing. After a beat, the lieutenant sighed. Look, we're not trying to corner you, but the woman you stabilized is one of the most high-profile executives on the continent. Her company's already calling us non-stop asking what happened. If you hadn't stepped in, she would have died, he finished. Yes, the lieutenant said, and we need to document that clearly. He gave the officer the full medical rundown. Symptoms, timing, actions taken. No embellishment, no dramatics, just facts. The lieutenant wrote fast, occasionally glancing up with a deeper respect each time Elias explained another split-second choice. When the statement ended, the lieutenant extended his hand. Moreno, thank you. Truly. He didn't shake the hand. Not out of disrespect, just because his mind was already back on Lena. He returned to her quickly. She brightened when he approached, relief softening her tired face. Are we done now? She asked. Almost. He lifted her into his arms again and started toward the main exit checkpoint. But a crowd had gathered there. Employees, passengers, reporters who'd somehow slipped past security. Murmurs rippled through them as he approached. That's him. That's the guy from the VIP wing. He kept her alive. Is he a doctor? No, maintenance, I heard. That can't be right. He ignored every whisper, but the attention followed him like a weight. A young technician in an airport vest jogged up, breathless. Sir, Moreno, right? The chief operations manager wants to speak with you. She said it's urgent. I need to get my daughter home, he said. It won't take long, she insisted. He exchanged a look with Lena. She looked exhausted, but she nodded faintly. It's okay. He followed the technician down a side corridor into a quieter administrative wing. Offices with glass walls lined the hallway. Inside, the largest one, stood a woman with a radio clipped to her belt, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back. Someone who had clearly been fighting to keep this airport functioning through chaos. You're him, she said the moment he stepped in, the maintenance tech from the VIP wing. Yes? I've spoken to half a dozen witnesses, she said, gesturing to her desk covered in reports. They all said the same thing. You didn't panic, you didn't freeze, you took control. You stabilized one of the wealthiest CEOs in the world with a belt, towels, and your bare hands. He didn't respond. He didn't want praise, especially not from someone who clearly didn't understand the price of that kind of knowledge. The manager exhaled. I need to know something, and I need the truth. You weren't just maintenance once, were you? He held her stare for a moment, then spoke quietly. None of that matters now. But it does, she said, because the board is already asking who you are. News crews are here, questions are coming. Before this turns into something bigger, I need to understand the man who just saved our entire airport from a PR disaster, and saved a woman who employs over 50,000 people. He stepped back slightly. I'm not talking about my past. Then let me talk about your present, the manager said. Right now, executives from her company are trying to piece together what happened, and when she wakes up, and she will, they're going to hear your name. That doesn't concern me. It should, she replied. Because you changed the outcome of this day. People saw it, staff saw it, security saw it, and this airport owes you more than it can ever pay back. He shook his head. I didn't do it for recognition. I know, she said softly. That's what makes this harder. He turned away, ready to leave. But just as he reached the door, the manager added one more sentence. She'll remember you, you know. People don't forget the face they see right before they lose everything. He paused, not turning back, but hearing the truth in her words. Then he stepped out of the office, lifted Lena into his arms again, and walked toward the exit. He didn't know it yet, but every step he took was drawing him closer to the moment when crisis resolution would collide with mutual redemption, and the world would see exactly who he had been all along. He carried Lena down the final stretch of the concourse toward the outer doors, the fluorescent lights humming above them, the air still thick with the scent of smoke and melted wiring. Emergency crews swarmed the area, guiding passengers, redirecting foot traffic, securing debris. But none of it mattered to him now. All he wanted was to step outside, breathe clean air, and get his daughter home. Yet something in the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just the lingering chaos or the exhaustion hanging over the crowd. It was the way people watched him as he passed. Some stepped aside instinctively, almost respectfully. Others stared outright, whispering to each other, trying to match what they had witnessed with the quiet man walking with a child in his arms. Lena nestled closer to him. "Dad, are they looking at us?" "Yes," he said gently, "but not for the reason you think." "What reason then?" He didn't answer. He wasn't sure he had one. They approached the final security checkpoint. A row of metal detectors now roped off, manned mostly by supervisors with clipboards instead of officers with scanners. A senior security manager stepped forward, eyes widening slightly as she recognized him. "Mr. Moreno?" He shifted Lena slightly. "We're trying to leave." "I understand, but before you go, the airport director requested, well, she insisted, that we escort you to the south exit." "We can walk ourselves," he said. "It's not about escorting for safety," she clarified. "It's about privacy." He frowned. "Privacy?" The woman stepped aside so he could see past her. At the far end of the concourse, through the glass doors, stood clusters of news vans, reporters gathering like hawks, cameras already pointing toward the terminal entrance. Some held up microphones. Others spoke into cameras with urgent energy. "They're here for the CEO?" he asked. "They're here for whoever kept her alive," the woman said. "And the airport staff have already told them your name." He exhaled slowly. He didn't want this. He didn't seek this. And yet it was unfolding around him whether he liked it or not. "We'll take the back route," the manager said softly. He nodded, shifting his weight, adjusting his hold on Lena. "Lead the way." They were escorted through a maintenance corridor, a long, narrow passage lit by flickering bulbs. Pipes hugged the ceiling overhead, the floor stained from years of foot traffic. It wasn't pretty, but it was quiet, and for that he was grateful. As they walked, Lena whispered, "Dad, is the lady going to be okay?" "She has a chance," he said, "because people got to her in time." "Because of you?" He hesitated a moment. "Because all of us did what we could." But he knew the truth, the timing, the pressure wrap, the airway adjustment. Those things weren't luck. They were the remnants of a life he'd walked away from long ago, hoping to give his daughter a new one. They reached the end of the corridor where a fire exit opened to a small, fenced-off loading area. A cool breeze slipped in, carrying the scent of rain on concrete. A single police SUV idled nearby, its engine rumbling softly. "You can leave through here," the supervisor said. "No cameras, no reporters." "Thank you," he said. She hesitated, then added, "What you did today, you changed the story, not just for her, for everyone who saw you." He didn't reply. He stepped outside, Lena still in his arms, and crossed the loading area toward the gate. The drizzle began to fall, soft, cold drops mingling with the soot on his clothes. Lena lifted her head. "It's raining," she whispered. "We'll get home soon," he said. Before they could reach the sidewalk, a voice called out behind them. "Sir, please, wait!" He turned. It was the security officer from the VIP lounge, the same one who'd tried to escort him out, then helped hold pressure on the CEO's injury. The man jogged toward them, out of breath, hair disheveled, eyes wide with urgency. "I'm glad I caught you," the officer said. "There's something you need to know." Elias stood still, silent, waiting. After you left, the CEO's team radioed in from the ambulance. She's still unconscious, but her vitals improved on the way to the trauma center. The staff said she kept trying to lift her hand. He nodded once. "That's good. That's not all," the officer added, lowering his voice. Before they closed the ambulance doors, she mouthed a word, only one. Multiple paramedics saw it. "What word?" The officer took a breath. "Your name. Moreno." "Clear as day." Lena blinked. "She remembers you." "Seems so," the officer said. "And her company's representatives are already asking for information about the man who kept her alive. They're sending people to the airport right now." A long moment passed. Wind blew through the loading zone, scattering rain across the asphalt. The faint hum of the terminal echoed behind them, mixed with distant sirens. He tightened his grip on Lena, steadying her tired little body in his arms. He didn't want attention. He didn't want recognition. He didn't want anyone digging into the past he'd buried. But crisis resolution had done its work. And now, the second half, mutual, redemption, was waking on a stretcher somewhere across the city. "Thank you for telling me," he said. The officer nodded. "I just thought you should know before you disappear." He turned to leave, but the officer added one last thing. "She pointed," he said. "Right before she blacked out, she pointed toward where you were standing." Lena whispered, "Dad. Does that mean she'll want to see you again?" He didn't know the answer. He only knew the story wasn't finished. He lowered her gently to the ground, took her hand, and together they stepped into the rain. The next part of the journey, one he hadn't chosen and didn't want, was coming fast. Rain pattered softly against the pavement as he and Lena stepped away from the loading zone. The cool droplets cut through the lingering smell of smoke clinging to his clothes, washing the chaos of the terminal off his skin one beat at a time. Lena squeezed his hand, her small fingers cold but steady. For a moment, it felt like the world was finally letting them leave. But just as they reached the sidewalk, the sudden wail of an approaching siren made him stop. Not frantic, not chaotic. A controlled, descending tone. A signal used by emergency vehicles when they needed space, not speed. He turned. A black SUV, sleek, tinted, unmistakably corporate, rolled up to the gate. Lena tugged his sleeve. "Is that for us?" "No," he said quietly. "It's for her." The vehicle stopped. Two people stepped out. One in a tailored charcoal coat, the other in medical scrubs under a windbreaker. Both scanned the area sharply before spotting him. Then, without hesitation, they approached. The man in the coat spoke first. "Mr. Moreno." He didn't answer. The woman beside him stepped forward. "Sir, I'm Dr. Halden. I'm with Haldane Aerospace's medical crisis team. We were briefed by the hospital the moment the CEO arrived." He kept Lena close, shoulders tensing. He didn't trust. Corporate medics. They rarely arrived for compassion. They arrived for control. "What do you need?" he asked. Dr. Halden's voice softened. "We need you." Lena stiffened. He shifted his body slightly in front of her. "Why?" "The CEO regained partial consciousness during transport," she explained. "She was sedated for emergency imaging, but before she went under, she asked one question. 'Is he safe?' Then she added your name." He didn't react, not externally. But something inside him tightened, a mixture of unwelcome recognition and a past he'd sworn would never pull him back. The man in the coat stepped in. "Our leadership team wants to meet you, immediately. I'm taking my daughter home. This concerns her, too," the man said carefully. He froze. The man lifted his hands. Not in a threatening way, in a narrative way. "I'm not interested in narratives," he said. "You might be," the man replied, "after you see what's happening." He gestured toward the glass wall facing the main terminal. Elias turned. Inside, reporters had rushed to the newly opened section of the concourse. Cameras pointed toward the back exit, toward where he had been only minutes earlier. Screens lit up with headlines being typed in real time. Photographers jostled for position. Airport staff held them back. Who is the mysterious man who saved Haldane CEO? Maintenance worker performs battlefield-level medical intervention. Hero or ghost? Witnesses describe man who vanished after rescue. He inhaled slowly through his nose. The story had escaped. "You can walk away," the man in the coat said, "but they won't stop searching. And sooner or later, they'll find your full history. You know they will." Lena looked up, confused. "Dad, what history?" He crouched so she was eye level. "Nothing you need to worry about." But the truth lingered between them. Combat trauma surgeon, peacekeeping, missions, field units. Too many nights holding strangers' lives together with whatever he had. Too many losses. Too many memories he never wanted her to associate with him. He straightened. "I'm still not going anywhere." Dr. Haldane stepped closer. "Then let us help you leave properly." He frowned. "Explain." "The CEO," she said gently, "made a request before sedation. If he saved me, don't let him disappear." He blinked. "She wants to thank you," Dr. Haldane continued, "publicly, privately, whatever you choose. But she doesn't want you to vanish before she wakes." He didn't respond. The man in the coat added, "She also asked that your daughter be checked for smoke inhalation, and she authorized the bill personally." He tightened his grip around Lena's hand. Not because he was afraid, but because the sincerity in their voices was harder to dodge than aggression. Lena whispered, "Dad, maybe we should let them check me. Just in case." He exhaled. "All right, quick exam, nothing else." Dr. Haldane nodded gratefully. "We can do it right here." They moved under the awning while she examined Lena, listening to her breathing, checking her oxygen level, shining a small light into her eyes. "She's okay," the doctor said. "Just tired." Relief washed through him. But before he could take Lena and leave, a hurried voice called from behind. "Mr. Moreno!" He turned again. A police sergeant jogged toward him, breathless. "You need to see something. It just went live." He held out his phone. A video was playing, shaky, grainy, shot by a bystander during the aftermath inside the VIP lounge. It showed the CEO unconscious, blood pooling beneath her. Him kneeling beside her, hands steady, giving orders with absolute clarity. The room chaotic around him, the pressure wrap, the airway check, the moment her fingers twitched toward him. The sergeant swallowed. This is everywhere now, millions of views already. He felt the air shift. The crisis was no longer confined to the airport. The world was awake now. Dr. Haldane spoke quietly. "This is why we came. Before the media builds the story for you, we want you to have a choice." "A choice in what?" "How the world sees you," she said. "How your daughter sees you. And how our CEO meets you again, because she will." Lena tugged his sleeve gently. "Dad, maybe we don't have to run." He stared at her small, brave face, at the future he'd been trying to protect by hiding the past. Rain fell harder now, tapping insistently against the pavement, against the SUV, against the tension hanging in the air. He finally spoke. "All right, take us to the hospital." Mutual Redemption had just begun its final ascent. The ride to the hospital was quiet at first, the hum of the SUV blending with the sound of rain streaking across the windows. Lena leaned against him, finally drifting into a heavy sleep, exhaustion pulling her under. He held her close, one arm wrapped around her small frame, the other braced against the door as the vehicle cut through traffic with a police escort ahead. Across from him sat Dr. Halden, reviewing updates sent from the trauma center. The man in the charcoal coat, clearly some senior executive from Haldane Aerospace, typed furiously on his phone, sending instructions, fielding calls, coordinating damage control. All business. But every so often, he paused and glanced at Elias with something like awe, or something like guilt. "The CEO is still in surgery," Dr. Halden said gently. "They're working to repair internal bleeding and stabilize the fractures. The scans suggest her chances improved because of your intervention." He nodded once, not taking credit because credit didn't matter. Survival did. "When can we leave?" he asked. "When we arrive, you can take your daughter to a quiet waiting room," she said. "No cameras, no press. Our team has secured a private access point." He appreciated that. He didn't want reporters shoving microphones toward Lena. She had already seen too much today. The SUV pulled into a secured entrance on the hospital's lower level. Bright floodlights illuminated the rain-slick concrete as medical staff waited with umbrellas and stretchers. They opened the door, helping Lena down with gentle hands while he followed closely. Inside, the hallway buzzed with activity. Doctors moved quickly between rooms. Monitors beeped steadily. The sterile scent of antiseptic was strong enough to sting his nose after hours of smoke and fuel fumes. Dr. Halden guided him toward a quieter section, a wing temporarily closed to the public due to renovations. "You can stay here," she said, opening a small waiting area with dim lights, soft chairs, and a vending machine humming in the corner. "I'll bring updates when we have them." "Thank you," he said. Lena rubbed her eyes, yawning. "Dad, can I sit next to you?" He sat on one of the chairs, and she curled into his side, hugging her backpack like a pillow. He brushed a hand gently over her hair. She whispered something about being hungry, and he promised food soon. But before he could even stand, the man in the charcoal coat stepped into the room. "Mr. Moreno," he said quietly, "may I speak with you outside for a moment?" He didn't want to leave Lena alone, but she was asleep again, breathing softly. He stood and followed the man into the hallway. The executive straightened his coat. "You should know, the story is no longer local. Every major outlet has picked it up." He didn't respond. "They're calling you the ghost in the maintenance jacket." Someone online edited the footage with dramatic music. It already has 3 million views. Still, he said nothing. The man exhaled. "Listen, this isn't just about a viral moment. Our CEO is a global figure. When she wakes up, and she's going to ask for you. And when she finds out exactly what happened, she's not going to accept silence." "I don't want attention," Elias said. "I believe you, but attention wants you." He felt his jaw tighten. "Your past is going to surface," the man continued. "Press will dig. Agencies will dig. People will spin stories. You can either let it happen uncontrolled, or work with us to shape the truth." "Shape?" "Yes. Control the narrative. Protect your daughter. Protect yourself." He shook his head. "I'm not part of your narrative." The man's expression softened. You weren't, until today. Before Elias could respond, a soft gasp came from behind them. The Navy blazer woman, the CEO's head of security, stood in the doorway of the waiting area. Her eyes were swollen, either from smoke or tears. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. She's out of surgery, the woman said, voice trembling. The doctors want to brief us. Lena stirred at the sound and sat up, rubbing her face. Dad, what's happening? He moved quickly to her side. Come with me. We're going to see how she's doing. They followed the security woman and Dr. Halden down a series of twisting corridors until they reached the glass wall of the surgical recovery bay. Behind it, machines beeped steadily. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency. And on the bed, pale, bandaged, with oxygen tubing across her face, lay the CEO. Not powerful, not commanding, not untouchable, just human. A surgeon stepped out to brief the group. The procedure was successful, he said. Significant internal bleeding was repaired, and we were able to stabilize the fractures. She'll be heavily sedated, but she's responding. She survived because she arrived with enough oxygen and circulation to tolerate the surgery. Dr. Halden nodded toward Elias. Because of him. The surgeon turned to him. Whoever performed the initial stabilization prevented catastrophic shock. We almost never see trauma patients arrive in this condition and still be viable for intervention. You gave us the time we needed. He nodded, acknowledging the words politely, but not absorbing them. He wasn't looking for gratitude. He was watching for something else. Movement. For a moment he thought he imagined it, but no. The CEO's left hand twitched, then lifted, barely an inch off the bed, and fell back again. She's trying to wake, Dr. Halden whispered. She's fighting, the security woman said, swallowing. Lena tugged his hand. She remembers you, that's what they said. He didn't know how to answer. He didn't know what he wanted to happen when those eyes finally opened, but the room held still. Every doctor, every executive, every security agent suddenly frozen as the CEO's eyelids fluttered. And then, through the haze of sedation, her head turned slightly toward the glass, toward him. Recognition flickered, faint, trembling, but real. Someone exhaled sharply. Another whispered, "She knows." He didn't move. He didn't speak. But in that moment, every person in that hallway understood one thing. The victory strategy had reached its turning point. Mutual redemption was no longer theoretical. It was unfolding, one breath at a time, behind the glass. The soft beeping of the monitors filled the hallway as he stood at the glass, watching the slow rise and fall of the CEO's chest. Her eyelids had fluttered with recognition, but the sedation pulled her back under before she could do more. Still, that single moment was enough to shift the weight of the room. Security officers straightened. Executives exchanged tight glances. Doctors paused with a new kind of respect. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply watched her breathe, measuring each inhale the way he used to assess soldiers in field tents lit by flickering lanterns. Dr. Halden stepped up beside him. She's moving into a lighter sedation cycle. It means the brain is functioning well. He nodded. Her vitals are holding, she continued. This is a good sign. He kept his eyes on the woman behind the glass. When will she fully wake? It's hard to say, an hour, maybe several. Trauma like hers takes time. The security woman, the one who had tried removing him from the lounge earlier, approached with slow, steady steps. Her posture no longer carried sharp authority. Now it carried humility. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. He didn't turn. "You were doing your job." "No," she whispered. "I was doing it poorly. She trusted me to keep the environment controlled and safe. And I failed. She swallowed. You protected her more than any of us did. He finally looked at her. Not unkindly, just directly. Next time, he said, you'll be ready. The woman exhaled shakily, as if the simple acknowledgement loosened a knot inside her. I hope so. Lena tugged his sleeve again. Dad, are we going home after she wakes up? Yes, he said softly. As soon as this part is done. She leaned against him, sleepy and warm, her cheek resting on his arm. He brushed her hair back gently. She'd seen too much today. She deserved normalcy again. Her room, her books, her small world untouched by corporate disasters and bleeding executives. A door hissed open behind them. The man in the charcoal coat entered, phone in hand, tension written across his shoulders. Moreno, he said, voice low. Her board just contacted me. They're watching everything. They know you're here. He didn't reply. They're requesting a private briefing with you tomorrow morning. No, he said immediately. It's not optional, the man pressed. They want to discuss your involvement before the media creates their own narrative. I'm not your employee, he said, and I don't report to boards. The man hesitated and then nodded. I understand. But you're in the center of a global storm, whether you chose to be or not. Lena blinked awake a little. Dad, what's a storm? Something you can't control, he murmured. Like the plane explosion? He paused. Yes, something like that. A sudden rustle of movement drew everyone's attention back to the glass. The CEO's fingers twitched again, more deliberately this time. Her head shifted. Her brow furrowed faintly, as if recognizing pain before recognizing faces. The surgeon stepped out. She's fighting sedation. She may wake very soon. Executives straightened, smoothing their clothes. Security positioned themselves with trained precision. Dr. Halden checked her clipboard. Everyone prepared for the moment the CEO's eyes would actually open. Everyone except him. He quietly lifted Lena. We're going to step outside for a moment. Dr. Halden blinked. She might wake. She doesn't need a crowd, he said. And I'm not waiting for her to open her eyes to validate what I already know. What do you know? The security woman asked softly. That she's alive, he said. That's enough. He walked down the hallway with Lena resting her head on his shoulder. The hum of the hospital followed them, soft, steady, almost comforting. He found a quiet alcove near a row of vending machines and sat down with her. She drew her legs up, leaning against him. Are you scared? She asked quietly. No. Are you worried? No. Then what are you? He thought for a moment. Tired, he said, but grateful. For what? That I got to keep someone alive today, he said, and that I get to take you home. She smiled faintly. Footsteps approached. Dr. Halden again. She's awake, the doctor said. He didn't stand immediately. He just stroked Lena's hair once. Is she asking for me? He asked. Yes. He exhaled slowly, then handed Lena a snack bar from the vending machine. Stay right here. I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, Dad. He stood and followed Dr. Halden back toward the recovery bay. As he approached the glass wall, he saw the CEO propped slightly upright, oxygen tube still in place, eyes half open. She looked dazed but conscious, alive in the truest sense. When she saw him, her breath caught. She lifted her right hand, weak but deliberate. The room froze. He stepped inside the bay. The surgeons stepped back. The executives fell silent. The security staff looked away out of respect. her eyes filled with something between confusion, recognition, and a gratitude so raw it almost hurt to witness. She pointed at him, slow, trembling, intentional. Her hand shook, but she held it in the air until he reached the side of her bed. He didn't speak first, neither did she, but in that moment, one survivor to the man who had kept her alive, every witness in that room felt the quiet weight of mutual redemption settling into place. Her voice finally broke through the oxygen hiss, barely a whisper. "You stayed." He nodded. "I had your life in my hands," he said softly. "It was my job." Her eyelids glistened. "No, it was your choice." He didn't argue, because this time, this moment, belonged to her. And the world would soon know exactly what she chose to do with it. For a long moment, the room stayed frozen around her raised hand. The machines hummed. The monitors pulsed. Doctors watched with quiet reverence. Executives stood rigid, almost afraid to breathe. But she didn't lower her hand until he was close enough for her to see him without strain. And when she finally let it fall back to the sheets, it wasn't from weakness. It was from recognition fulfilled. She blinked slowly, processing the shape of him, the weight of him, the impossible fact that he wasn't a hallucination, carved out of adrenaline and blood loss. "You were there," she whispered, the oxygen tube fluttering with each word. "I was," he answered. "You stayed." "I did." She swallowed, pain tightening her features. Most people wouldn't have. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. She could see the truth in his eyes. This wasn't about heroics or recognition. This was about instinct, skill, and a man who simply refused to let someone die on a cold floor. A nurse stepped forward. "Ma'am, you shouldn't talk too much yet." The CEO lifted a trembling hand to silence her. Her gaze never left him. "You saved my life," she said. He shook his head gently. "I bought you time. The surgeons saved your life." She closed her eyes briefly, the smallest smiles forming. Spoken like someone who's done this before. He didn't correct her. Behind him, the executive shifted, waiting for permission to step in. The security captain at the door held, herself perfectly still, clearly overwhelmed by what she was witnessing. The CEO opened her eyes again. "I need a moment with him." Everyone hesitated. Then the surgeons nodded and gestured the others out of the room. Even the security team stepped back. The door closed softly, leaving only him, her, and the rhythmic beep of machines. She tried to lift her hand again, but he gently placed his fingers around hers so she wouldn't strain. Her breathing steadied at the contact. "I remember the sound," she said. "The crash, the glass, the column, and then your voice, calm, focused. Like you'd been waiting for that exact moment." "I wasn't," he said quietly. "But I knew what to do." Her eyes shimmered. "You didn't hesitate." "No. You didn't even hesitate when her voice cracked. "When I mocked you." He didn't flinch. "You were stressed. You didn't know me." "That doesn't excuse it." He didn't argue. She took another slow breath. "I don't deserve what you did." "That's not how this works," he said. "You were hurt. You needed help. I gave it. End of story." She squeezed his hand faintly. "Not end of story. Not anymore." He pulled back slightly. "I'm not looking for anything from you. That's why this matters." She blinked, steadying herself. People who don't want anything are the ones who deserve the most. Before he could answer, the door swung open again. A nurse stepped in quietly. "Ma'am, your vitals are rising. We need to adjust your medication." The CEO nodded, and the nurse prepared an injection. As the sedative began to take effect, her eyes grew heavy again, but her grip on his hand didn't loosen. "I'm not done," she murmured. "You need rest." Her eyelids lowered, but she managed one more sentence. "Don't leave before I wake up again." Then the sedative pulled her under, her hand finally slipping from his. He stood there for another moment, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the quiet stability of someone who had come through fire and survived. Then he stepped back, letting the medical team surround her again. Outside the room, the security captain waited. She looked shaken, not by fear but by the magnitude of what she'd seen. "I never thought I'd see her like that," she said softly. "Not vulnerable, not grateful." "She's human," he said. "Everyone knows that. No one believes it." He didn't respond. "You should get your daughter," the captain added. "She's been asking for you." He nodded and made his way back down the quiet hall. Lena sat on the vending machine bench, legs swinging, half-finished snack bar beside her. She brightened when he approached. "Dad, is she awake now?" "Yes," he said gently. "She's going to be okay." Lena smiled with sleepy relief and reached for his hand. As they walked toward the elevator to find food, the security captain followed a few steps behind. "Mr. Moreno," she said, "I think you should know something. The board, the press, the company, they're all bracing for what comes next. But inside that room, she wasn't a CEO." He raised an eyebrow. What was she? "Someone whose entire world tilted toward one person," the captain said. "You." He didn't answer, but Lena squeezed his hand tighter, sensing the weight of the words. They reached the small cafeteria tucked near the end of the trauma wing. It was nearly empty, sterile lights reflecting off polished floors. He ordered Lena soup and a sandwich, then sat with her at a corner table. She ate slowly, the day's exhaustion catching up with her in every movement. "Dad?" she asked between bites. "Yes? Are you going to be okay?" He brushed a hand over her hair. "As long as you're okay, I'm okay." She smiled weakly, but inside, he knew something was shifting, something he couldn't stop. The crisis had been resolved, the life had been saved, but mutual redemption, the part he had spent years avoiding, was closing in from every direction. And before the sun rose again, the world would demand that he face exactly who he used to be. They stayed in the cafeteria until Lena finished the last bite of her sandwich, eyelids drooping with every minute. He gathered her into his arms again, feeling the familiar weight of her head settling on his shoulder. The soft hum of the hospital at night wrapped around them. Footsteps, distant monitors, the rolling squeak of a cart. It was quieter now, calmer, almost sacred after the chaos they had survived. "Dad, are we going home now?" she mumbled. "Yes," he whispered. "Just one more stop." He carried her back toward the trauma wing, turning down the same long corridor lined with glass rooms. Nurses moved quietly between beds, speaking in hushed tones. When he reached the CEO's room, the security captain stepped aside, as if she had been expecting him. "She's awake again," the captain said, "and she won't talk to anyone else until she sees you." He hesitated. He didn't want to reopen old wounds or invite attention that could follow his daughter for years. But the look on the captain's face wasn't pressure. It was respect. Maybe even relief. As though the CEO herself needed this moment to steady her place in the world again. He pushed the door open gently. The CEO lay propped against her pillows, still pale, still bandaged, but clearer now, eyes sharper, breaths deeper. Medical equipment surrounded her, glowing softly in the dim light. When she saw him, she exhaled in a tremble that wasn't pain, but gratitude. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised," he said. Her gaze moved to Lena, who lifted her head sleepily, blinking in curiosity. "And this must be your daughter," the CEO said softly. "She's brave. She watched everything." Lena rested her cheek on his collarbone, too drained to speak but clearly listening. The CEO swallowed. "I need you to hear something while my mind is clear enough to say it." He stepped closer, careful not to jostle Lena. "I remember the moment," she said. "Not all of it, but enough. I remember the sound of everything breaking. I remember the pain. And I remember reaching out and feeling your hands. Steady, certain, refusing to let go." He didn't reply. He just watched her with the quiet patience that had carried them both through the day. "You saved my life," she said. "Not because of status or obligation or recognition. You saved me because it was the right thing to do. And I mocked you before it happened. I dismissed you. I treated you like you didn't exist. That doesn't matter now," he said. "Yes," she breathed, voice tightening. "It does, because I was wrong." Silence settled over the room, gentle but heavy. She reached for the remote on her bed and clicked it, raising her upper body another inch. "I've built a life around being in control," she said, "around being untouchable, but today I felt none of that. Today I felt human. And the only reason I'm still here is because a man I treated as beneath me refused to let me die." He shifted his weight, not out of discomfort but humility. "Anyone in my position would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I've worked with thousands of people. I know what panic looks like. I know what hesitation looks like. I saw neither in you." Her voice softened. "You were trained for this. You've done this before." He didn't answer. "I won't force you to tell me who you used to be," she said. "But I want you to know something. I don't intend to forget what you did. I don't intend to pretend this never happened. And when I'm strong enough to stand, I will publicly acknowledge the man who held my life in his hands." He shook his head gently. "I don't need a spotlight." "I know," she said, "which is exactly why you deserve one. But the choice will be yours." Her attention shifted to Lena. "Your father is the kind of man people should learn about, not search for. You must be proud of him." Lena nodded against his shoulder. The CEO closed her eyes for a brief moment, steadying her breath. "Before you go, I want to do something I couldn't earlier." She lifted her hand again, slowly, painfully, and this time it wasn't just pointing. It was a salute. A deliberate, clear, wordless salute from the most powerful woman in the room to the quiet man she had once dismissed. He didn't return the gesture. He simply bowed his head slightly, honoring it without taking ownership of it. That was enough. The CEO lowered her hand with a faint smile. "Go home. Rest. You've done more than enough for one lifetime." He nodded and stepped back. "Take care of yourself." "I will, because you made sure I could." He left the room with Lena in his arms, past the security team who now stood straighter around him, past executives who looked at him without arrogance, past nurses who whispered his name with awe. The crisis had ended, but its echo would follow every person who witnessed this day. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air felt clean again, carrying the faint scent of wet concrete and a new beginning. He lifted Lena higher against his chest. "Let's go home." "Okay," she murmured. They walked across the dim parking lot toward the night, leaving behind the chaos, the cameras, the corporate world that had tried to define him. He wasn't the man they mocked, and he wasn't the man they were now trying to elevate. He was simply a father who refused to let someone die. And that was enough. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?